I've been at DEEP for quite a bit, have held various positions within the agency over that span, and are likely very, very well known to all of you. And we're delighted that they're both here to talk about PFAS. Diane is currently the director of DEEP's Office of Emergency Response Planning and Support. And Shannon, for all intents and purposes, I think it's fair to say, is DEEP's PFAS coordinator across the agency and works within DEEP's remediation division. Again, we're delighted to have this learning session and to start a conversation on PFAS, which is going to continue because of the significance of PFAS in today's environment and today's regulatory world. So please join me in welcoming Diane and Shannon.
Thank you all, and thank you for the invitation to speak to you all this morning.
Just let me quickly interrupt for a second, because we probably had some new people who are wondering what's going on in terms of signing in and stuff. If you did try to get in and you're called in, there was a new link that was sent out. So while we're listening to this wonderful presentation, if you want to try and find that new link, which is in the more detailed section of your invite, feel free, because we still have over 10 call-in users. Thank you.
Sure.
Shannon, to advance the slides, it's the left-hand side of your screen. There's a
Thank
0,
you.
1 in the center, and you could just click the arrow below.
Okay, got it. Okay, so different platform than I'm used to working on, but that's fine. We'll roll with it. So again, thank you all this morning for inviting us to speak with you all. So as Harold mentioned, we're here to talk about the new legislation that recently came into effect regarding the use of PFAS-containing firefighting foam. So go through our agenda. Didn't really know what everyone's background knowledge was on PFAS, so I'm just going to spend a minute or two going over what are PFAS and what's the big deal and why are we concerned about them. Then we'll get into the meat of the talk, which is Public Act 21-191. Okay, before I go any further, I'm getting a little echo. Is there? Okay. Can everybody hear me okay? Thumbs up? Okay. If you can't hear me, please interrupt me. Okay, sorry. I'm thrown off this morning now. Thank you. I see the thumbs up. Okay. Okay, so we have our new legislation we're going to talk about. There is a provision that allows for an extension with the ban on PFAS-containing firefighting foam that Diane is going to speak about. And we're going to give you a quick update on where we are with our AFFF Take-Back program. And of course, as time allows, we're happy to take your questions. So next, what are PFAS? If you've seen me present before, this is a familiar slide. These are a huge group of compounds that are characterized typically by having one fully fluorinated carbon atom. They were discovered by accident in a DuPont lab back in the 40s, and quickly they realized, wow, this stuff is great. It has all these super attributes that make it useful in our daily lives and in industry. They're very resistant thanks to a very, very strong carbon-fluorine bond that's very hard to break, and that gives great attributes such as the oil, water, heat repellent characteristics, plus they're very stable. The bad part is these same characteristics also are bad in the environment, we've found in more recent years. Because of that strong carbon-fluorine bond, they're extremely persistent, resist degradation. The more we research about them, the toxicologists are finding that they're bioaccumulative and toxic at extremely low levels. at the parts per trillion level, you can have health effects. And they migrate very easily in water and air. So they're the perfect bad guy. So they've been in common use since the 1950s, and we all have them in our houses. Everything from our nonstick cookware and stain-resistant carpets, our Gore-Tex field clothes. And another item that brings us here today is the aqueous film-forming foam that's used to extinguish Class B flammable liquid fires. So, there we go. I quickly mentioned a few of the health problems. The more they research, the more they find effects on kidney, different types of cancer, developmental effects in infants. It's present in most people's blood worldwide. We have drinking water issues because of the ready transport in the environment. It's everywhere, and we're finding that replacement chemicals aren't necessarily any better. This slide gives you some visuals of the range of materials that may contain PFAS, everything from our rainwear to fabric softener, food packaging, coatings, metal plating, our firefighting foam down in the lower corner here, and they end up in our waste streams as well. So they're not treated at sewage treatment plants, they're ending up in landfills, incinerators. EPA still isn't sure exactly how hot you need to degrade and fully mineralize these compounds. So we have a lot of concerns. So specific to the aqueous film forming foam, known as AFFF, they can be found at many facilities, and when there are releases, they tend to be significant. So the military has a specification for this firefighting foam that's been around since the late 60s, early 70s, and it requires a certain percentage of PFAS chemicals in the product to meet the mil spec. So military bases, airports of a certain size that are classified by the Federal Aviation Administration as being Part 139. So basically your larger airports that have X number of passengers in a plane, they're required to have AFFF in their aircraft rescue firefighting vehicles. So airports are a source. Certainly crash sites where there are flammable liquid fires involved, it can be used. Oil terminals, refineries, chemical plants, firefighting training. Firefighters, they train a lot. They want to be prepared for the if and when the next big incident happens. And fire suppression systems, of course, as well. Yeah. So 2 years ago, Connecticut made it on the map with respect to PFAS and having a different kind of PFAS incident, different from Hoosick Falls or some of the manufacturers up in Vermont and New Hampshire. We had a major accidental release of aqueous film forming foam from a hangar at Bradley International Airport that discharged through the sanitary sewer system and the Windsor wastewater treatment facility into the Farmington River. And the photo on the left was the Farmington River, the Farmington River, the next morning. It was bank-to-bank foam. We had to institute a fish consumption advisory, and fortunately, over the course of the next year, the PFAS levels in the river did indeed decrease such that we're back to our normal fish consumption rules for the river. Shortly after that June incident, we had the tragic B-17 crash at Bradley, and AFFF needed to be used and likely saved some of the lives. during that incident. But the stormwater system at Bradley directs to Rainbow Brook in Windsor, and this was the scene of some of the cleanup in somebody's backyard. So, you know, PFAS, AFFF was, you know, in the forefront on our minds. Coincidentally, around the same time in July of 2019, Governor Lamont put together the Connecticut Interagency PFAS Task Force, which commissioners of DEEP and the Department of Public Health were chair. We took an active role in organizing, I think it was about 18 or 19 other state agencies to come up with a holistic view of what we need to do to address PFAS in the state. So we had 3 committees: human health, pollution prevention, and remediation, each tasked with coming up with recommendations for how we could address PFAS with respect to these topic areas. And these recommendations were memorialized in the November 1st, 2019 PFAS Action Plan. I have a link to that at the end of the presentation if you're not familiar with it. So we have a list of recommendations for each of those 3 topic areas. In addition, we had cross-cutting topics that came up in each committee, including education, outreach, and communication, which is part of, you know, I'm supporting that by being here and trying to get the message out to you all today, and also legislative opportunities, which also brings us here today. So one of the recommendations in the action plan was that we need to limit or stop the use of aqueous film forming foam wherever we can. As I said, it's a major release every time it happens, even though there are many other sources of PFAS in commercial products industry, in our homes, and so forth. This is something that other states were taking a look at. There were new fluorine-free foams being developed and available that could replace AFFF. So this was a recommendation we felt is achievable. And the cost benefit, yes, there's cost to implementing this initially, but the long-term cost as far as environmental cleanup associated with each release, those costs far exceed the costs of transitioning to a cleaner alternative. So this legislation, it was initially SB 837, this legislative session. It was first proposed in 2020, but with COVID, that pretty much killed everything. You know, all of the legislative initiatives related to PFAS last year. So it was reintroduced this year, and it did pass. And it ended up in the Environment Committee, they ended up combining a second bill, which is Section 2 of PA 21-191, regarding the future ban of PFAS containing food packaging beginning January 1, 2024. That's part of Connecticut's toxics in packaging legislation. The statute references there. I am not an expert in that, and we're not going to talk about that today, but perhaps, you know, we'd be willing to get the right people in the room to discuss that topic in the future. What we're here to talk about today is Section 1, the AFFF provisions. And when you get these slides, the name of the act here concerning the use of PFAS and Class B firefighting foam, that is a hyperlink that will bring you to the actual bill. So in summary, the bill imposes a phased ban on the use of the Class B firefighting foam. It's more than just AFFF. It can include fluoroprotein foams, anything that has fluoro in it, in essence. So upon bill passage, which was July 13th of this year, any testing and training with Class B foams containing PFAS was banned. And October 1st this year, firefighting and vapor suppression uses of AFFF, that ban also went into effect. Airports have more time they need to comply. In addition, well, until October 4th this year, the FAA required the mil-spec firefighting foam at airports. That is no longer a requirement. However, the firefighting foam used at Part 139 airports still needs to meet the oh God, Friday morning, can't find words. They still need performance. That's the word. Okay, so they still need to meet the performance requirements of that mil spec, even if they do not contain PFAS. For federally required uses at federal facilities, they have to follow what the military wants. So Connecticut can't trump that, obviously. So they will be allowed to continue using AFFF until it's either prohibited by the federal law or until federal law changes not requiring it. Then they have 1 year to transition. So the next few slides, I have a summary of each section of the law that pertains to the AFFF ban. Again, the first one I just went over, bans testing and training upon bill passage, which was July 13th. The second section bans the use for firefighting and vapor suppression after October 1st of this year. However, it was provided that DEP identified an alternative by July 1st. Some backstory to that, prior to this bill being introduced for the past probably 2 years, the Department of Emergency Services and Public Protection Commission on Fire Prevention and Control had assembled a fluorine-free foam committee that included folks from their office, a DEP emergency response coordinator, supervisor, and many fire chiefs and fire professionals in the state. After looking at the alternatives and doing trial test burns and fire extinguishment demonstrations with the vendors, they opted to select National Foam's Universal F3 Green for use in the state's regional foam trailers, which I can answer questions and talk about at a later point here. So Commissioner Dykes did issue a statement identifying National Foam's Universal Green as an alternative that is available. Therefore, this ban, effective 10/1, was actually in effect. Okay, we may identify other alternatives in consultation with DESPE. So alternative foams, what alternative foams can you use? Well, the legislation specifically bans PFAS, okay? It doesn't talk about any other chemicals that may be in there. So when you're looking at alternative foams, you want to make sure that the manufacturer is not including other substitutes. This is something that we found local fire departments were not really knowledgeable of, and apparently a lot of the salespersons for other firefighting foams don't really know what the ingredients are and the products they're selling. So we found instances of fire departments telling us, well, the salesman said it was fine because EPA wasn't regulating it. It's like, well, EPA is not really officially regulating anything with respect to PFAS. They're getting there, but there was the PFOA and PFOS, agreements from the early 2000s for phasing out use of those two chemicals out of thousands Okay, so the fire department started using shorter chain PFAS chemicals that were in newer modern firefighting foams and thought they were fine. Well, guess what? They're not really. So what we're asking is when you're purchasing a new foam, if you're going to do this change out, be sure you know what you're getting. Consult with the manufacturer to ensure that the new foam doesn't contain any intentionally added PFAS. There's also the Green Screen Certified program. They have about a dozen firefighting foams now for Class B use that can be considered. So, you know, unfortunately, we don't have the resources to do a thorough investigation and testing of every single alternative firefighting foam out there. I've been asked on several occasions, is DEEP going to be approving a new foam? To the extent we're able to, perhaps, but we're just not in that position to be able to do that at this time. So we're not going to be formally approving any firefighting foams. The selection has been made for use at state facilities where it's appropriate for use. And if local fire departments and private industry want to follow that lead, feel free to do so. We did do some testing on the universal green, and we did find it does not contain any, we did different PFAS assays. They were non-detect. We looked for total halogens as well. It did not contain any chlorine, fluorine, or bromine compounds. So we feel more comfortable with that. Now, when I say does not contain, it's within the available detection limits. These matrices are very hard to analyze and need to be diluted quite a bit, but we did our best. Okay, sorry about that. That was an important point I wanted to talk about since I get a lot of questions about it. So moving on next, back to the Public Act. Section 1B3 deals with airports. They do have until October 1st, 2023 to make that transition. However, we want airports to immediately start taking mitigation measures to prevent releases. And, you know, God forbid there is an incident, you know, once everything is under control, try to get the cleanup underway as soon as possible. And Section 1B4 that addresses the federal uses that I previously mentioned. Okay, next, extensions. Diane?
Shannon, and hello everyone, and on behalf of everyone at DEEP, I just want to say it's great to see you all participate in this very important forum that's the IA host. And Harold, you're absolutely right. Shannon is the class coordinator extraordinaire for the department. She is a contact for all things PFAS. So for a couple of elements, she rightly asked for some participation from other parts of the agency.
Hey, Diane, I don't know if it's just me, but we're having trouble hearing you.
It isn't just you, Chuck.
Okay, can't hear you yet, Diane.
Let me see if it's any better.
Oh, yes.
Is that better with the headset?
Yeah, much better.
Okay, sorry about that. You know, with the Zoom, I just use my phone for audio. So I just will quickly say thanks for being here, everyone. We do appreciate your participation in this important forum because, as Shannon mentioned, it is a good way for the department to help get information out there. So let me just do a check. Is that better? Thumbs up? Okay. Great. So on the pollution prevention side of PFAS management, the Division of Emergency response and spill prevention has been involved in a couple of areas, and one is processing extensions. So the Public Act anticipated that there would be some industries very specifically that would need a little more time to comply outside of the aviation exceptions that Shannon mentioned. So for chemical plants, oil refineries, inland and marine terminals, petroleum terminals, storage and distribution facilities, people who manage flammable liquids, it is possible to apply for a 2-year extension. And so we have posted on the department's website a very, very simple, oh, Shannon, advance, please, click. A very simple form. It's just 2 pages, it's a fillable form, and it's essentially just asking what's your plan and how are you doing with finding alternatives. And then that gets reviewed, and if approved, just gets signed and sent right back to you. So it's a pretty quick turnaround time. We have gotten about 19 extension requests so far. Even if it's after October 1st, we're still accepting them because we recognize people are learning about the laws, applicability, et cetera. And then because the majority of the extensions we thought would be necessary really relate to our marine terminals. Our marine terminals program is hosting this process. So you email your completed form to deep.marineterminals@ct.gov. So we're using that programmatic email even if the facility that you are or you're representing is not a marine terminal. And although marine terminal staff are the contact and are managing the extension process, they consult with Shannon, our PFAS coordinator extraordinaire, and others in reviewing the request for extension. And the staff person, David Keating, his email is listed there. And his phone number as well. It's a hyperlink. Next. Then the other element for you to be aware of is a take-back program that the law requires. And the law says that DEEP shall develop or identify a take-back program for municipal departments. And also there's an enforcement provision for the law. Next. So we didn't wait around till October 1st to get started, knowing a take-back program would be a little complicated. We got started as soon as we got the funds. So as soon as we got bond money, we went to our state contracts for waste disposal handlers and selected a contractor, and also worked with the 700 firehouses and 325 fire departments around our state and surveyed them to see what volumes that they had and in what type of containers they were. Most are in 5-gallon containers and 55-gallon containers. So we're in the process of picking up these containers from all over the state, and we're almost done. We're about 90% complete. We're sending out a last call to the fire departments, and that's the first phase that will be done, and that's the container collection and storage disposal, and that's the easy part. The next part is the harder part, and so that's why Shannon's working on it, which is how do we decontaminate this equipment? So we've started to look at that, and then the next phase after that will be to actually remove the firefighting foam from apparatus around the state and decontaminate the apparatus so that fire departments can refill without cross-contamination concerns. Next. And so we got the word out in a few different ways, talking to fire chiefs, sending out an electronic poster, mailing a paper poster, posting on the Commission's Fire Prevention and Controls website and listservs, et cetera. But if you represent anyone, fire department, who's still trying to understand that they can have their material picked up at the state's expense, they can contact the Commission on Fire Prevention and Control at this email, foamsurvey@ct.gov. Click. Next. Oh, back to you, Shannon, because this is the hard part.
It's challenging, but it's also really interesting. So the remediation division issued a request for proposals for doing a pilot decontamination study. We understood from work done by others, especially in Australia and Europe, that if you simply drain your equipment of your AFFF or whatever your fluorine containing foam was and refill with a green foam that was supposedly fluorine-free, there is cross-contamination that can occur. So we are demonstrating using two different cleaning solvents, one called perfluoride, another called either V171 or Fluorofighter, provided by ACOM and TRS and Arcadis, to see how clean we can get it. And also, the important part is we don't have unlimited funding, so there's going to be a cost benefit analysis component of this. We know for a start, we are not going to get equipment clean enough to eat off of. That's not going to happen. But we want to get the biggest bang for the buck to reduce future releases. Okay. So this testing is underway. It was delayed a bit due to COVID, and then due to, just as you all are experiencing problems with shipping delays, product availability, transportation issues, so have we. So we were hoping to have all of the state's 8 regional foam trailers cleaned by October 1st. And at this point, we have 3 complete, and we're waiting for all the test results to come back. So in the photos here, these are the state's regional foam trailers. They each contain about 500 gallons of AFFF and have assorted nozzles and proportioners, and come equipped with various lengths of handline fire hose. And local fire departments can call upon use of these trailers to respond to significant incidents. So we're working on those. They're managed jointly by DESPE and DEEP. We also have an initiative. We were aware that some local fire departments proactively switched over to fluorine-free foam already. And we wanted to get samples of their new foams to see what degree of cross-contamination occurred, and also find out what level of cleaning they did. So we're looking at those results as well. So that's about a half hour we were asked to present. That's a quick wrap up. I've provided some links here to DEEP's PFAS webpage and the task force and our action plan and the Commission on Fire Prevention and Control's webpage, which has some additional information. We're happy to answer your questions. You can also contact me. Email is best, but please give me a couple days to respond since things are very busy. But I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Well, to start, this is Chuck Nicole. So is there some kind of database or records available for when PFAS, when AFFF was used in past firefighting operations? So if someone's going out to do a phase 1 and determine whether that there was a fire and that the AFFF was used so it's an area of concern, how do people find out if that was used over the last X number of years? If that issue's even come up in the past.
Shannon? So we anticipated this question actually, and so about a year ago, I had an intern pull our spill database and pull it for a whole variety of terms: fire, foam, which pulls up a lot of soap foam, fire, car fire. We're using a 1996 database, so it's not an easy query. So you have to do like 20 different queries. And we did do that essentially between 2000 and the present, and we continue to look every week to see where foam has been applied. I don't think it's really that helpful in many ways because there's not a lot of information. It just says that someone reported to the department that a fire happened or that the fire involved the application of foam. So we are polishing that data a bit, and to the extent that it's useful, we can make that available. But it's just so generic that it isn't, I'm not sure how actually useful it would be. But another thing you can do is we've put our, all of our spill records are digitized and are available through the department's portal, the online document portal. So you can search if there's a particular site you're looking for, you can find all the spill records for that. And so that would include anything for that site that would have had firefighting foam used. And you can also do queries yourself on Connecticut Open Data. So we've put all of the incidents since 1996 that are in our database on the Open Data portal. And so one of the columns identifies what the substance is. And so you can also filter that by the word foam or by the word fire. But I think the simplest thing is really to do your typical search of by the location and then look at the specifics. I hope that helps.
What about the fire departments? Do we know if they keep records of that at all?
Shannon, to you?
Some do and some don't. From what we've found, it really depends on the town. The other thing is the fire departments didn't realize there was anything wrong with AFFF. They were told it was simply soap. Okay, it's soap bubbles. It forms a vapor barrier. Your vapors won't ignite. The fire will go out. Great stuff. One other thing I just wanted to add to Diane's statements about the spills database is that not all fire departments have historically reported to DEEP when there was a fire and if anything was applied. So it's not a complete accounting by any means of where AFFF has been used in response to an emergency incident. Your best bet is just doing your normal phase 1 work, talking to site contacts, even some information possibly from newspapers, people who know if oh yeah, there was a huge fire, we had fire trucks from all over the place here. That may be an indicator that AFFF may have been used. So.
And then Shannon, you might want to talk about the work in response to the action plan. One of the things is to inventory all of the different potential sources. So programmatically across the state, the department is inventorying the areas of concern. Do you want to elaborate on that?
Yeah. Another one of the recommendations that came out of the PFAS action plan was to develop a GIS database and mapping tool, primarily for agency use. There are so many possible PFAS sources, not just AFFF, but different industries and so forth that have used it for years, again, without anybody really knowing this was going to be a big deal. So our primary concern is protection of drinking water resources. So that's what we're designing this database for. But we're including likely potential PFAS suspect sources. Again, we have very little sampling data, so you can't go and say, oh yeah, that site definitely has it. We're not at that level, and I don't think we will be for years, honestly. But we have a good idea of what types of industries or operations may be associated with PFAS use. Certainly, I'm sorry to single out fire departments, but fire departments because of the use of AFFF, airports, fire training areas for certain where there have been repeated applications of AFFF during the course of training. And our landfills. PFAS waste goes into all types of landfills, industrial, municipal, solid waste. And there's a potential for it to be in the leachate and groundwater surrounding landfills based on work that neighboring states have already done. We've also assembled a list of over 100 NAICS codes for industries that may be associated with PFAS use. So trying to put all of this information together, we want to develop a heat map of sorts to help us prioritize parts of the state where drinking water resources may be at risk. So as we get further down the road, there is an intent to have a public-facing part of this GIS, but it's still in draft form and we're working out bugs with it. So that's where we stand on that effort.
Chuck, there's a couple of questions in the chat. Should we get to those next? Sarah Mahan and Brian Conti have questions. Should we go for those?
Sure. Okay, Sarah. Okay, it's she states, for those who may not have access to the chat who are on the phone, it's been okay. It's been difficult to find alternatives for building sprinkler systems that manage polar solvents. Will any guidance be coming out regarding foams for different types of uses? Sarah, unfortunately, I'm not a real expert in that. However, the universal green F3, that is supposed to be effective for both polar and non-polar solvents. That was a concern that the Fluorine-Free Foam Committee had. So I think there are some available. Are we going to provide guidance? DEEP, I don't believe, has that level of expertise. I would be in contact with perhaps the Commission on Fire Prevention and Control at DESPE, or perhaps the State Fire Marshal's Office. That's more their bailiwick than ours. Brian Conte, what are the expectations from the department for documenting the decontamination activities prior to foam replacement? That is a good question.
Right. And I think one thing to keep in mind while you're thinking about that, Shannon, is that, you know, what is the risk management objective? You know, what are we trying to achieve with decontamination? And it's really risk reduction. And so if today there was an event and foam was applied because of threat to human life, really, you know, that is something the department is saying is okay to do. But the actual cleanup and the decontamination of the equipment after that foam has been used and then gets replenished is really about the overall net environmental benefit of reducing the toxicity of what's in that truck. Because if you then were to say we've emptied the truck and we've now decontaminated it and replaced it with foam, yes, there may still be some residual even after decontamination activities, but the concentration would be significantly lowered. So it's really, the objective is risk reduction and concentration reduction, but we don't currently have a performance standard for decontamination, right, Shannon?
Correct. We're not sure what our own standard is going to be, so we're learning along with you. I would recommend that you maintain whatever documentation of what your activities were just for your own use. And if you want to do a before and after sample to show what that level of risk reduction is, I would think that would probably be a good thing to hold on to, and your insurance company may like that too.
Right, and that's exactly what we're doing today. We've actually been sampling equipment where the fire department has already replaced the equipment or replaced the concentrate with different types of decontamination in between the different concentrates. So we're looking at that and happy to share that in the future when we gather up the information from the pilot work that Shannon described as well. And that would put us in a better place of stating some understanding of what we would expect. Wojtek also had a question, which is really, I think, going to be the subject of the phase 2. We don't want to take up your entire meeting today, and so we broke this up into 2 phases. The first is just introduce the law today, the Public Act that's now in effect. And then the second piece is I think next month, Marcy has said it could be on the agenda to talk more about what to do about releases. So Wojtek asked if there's any guidance on what DEEP's looking for as far as implementing mitigation of releases and what DEEP would consider a release to the environment. So that's really that's such a big topic. We broke that up into two and are looking forward to speaking with you about that next time. Anything else on that, Shannon?
If it's with respect to deployment of AFFF, some ITRC, the Interstate Technology and Regulatory Council, has some great guidance on best management practices, following deployment of AFFF. If it's a fixed facility, let's say you have a fixed fire suppression system, you may want to start planning now for, okay, we haven't changed out the AFFF yet. If there is a release, where does it go? What can we do to stop it from entering the sanitary sewer system if you have an oil water separator there? What can we do if we're in an area not served by sewers to contain that release and mitigate any larger impacts to the environment? So that comes into spill response planning. And as soon as your emergency has resolved, to take prompt action to probably dig out any contaminated soil, stage it separately so you don't have it infiltrating into the groundwater, especially if there are wells or if you're near a surface water body, you want to prevent the AFFF from getting into storm drains or any nearby rivers or streams to minimize that damage that could occur. But otherwise, I copied the question down, and we'll see if Ray Freegon and I can address that next time we come back.
Right. And that's exactly the best practices that the emergency response unit is using when we're coordinating releases that have occurred. Is just to stop the migration to drains, storm drains, or the sewer drains. Any other questions?
We have anything else from anyone? This has been very, very informative and very helpful, and we look forward to deeper dive next month, which I am sure will have lots of questions in chat and lots of questions from all of us here.
Great.
So we very much appreciate it. And I also want to note, whether it's coincidence or not, we have 85 people on this call or on this Zoom, on this WebEx. And that's a terrific number, and shows it can be seen as showing a lot of interest in what's going on the PFAS side of the house.
Great. Yes. Thank you. Well, we are very appreciative of everyone's participation and willingness to learn about this contaminant and its nature. And one thing, EPCRA toxic release inventory reporting requirements do now include some PFAS elements, and all of that information is available on the EPA web pages.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'll echo Diane. Thank you for having us, and we're happy to continue the conversation. As I mentioned before, we're learning about this and trying to do the right thing right along with all of you. So we're happy to have this discussion. We try to anticipate questions and issues that may come up, but we can't think about everything. So let us know. Thank you.
Thank you all very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Chuck, we're going straight into the task force summaries and start with the waste task report.
That was the plan, and you're up first, as you know.
Oh boy. Well, good morning, everyone. A few updates on the waste task force summary. Start with the breaking news and the big news, which is that on October 13th, Deep posted the hearing officer's comment and response document with respect to the release reporting regulations. The next step for that is for that to be transmitted to the LLRC. And if they do it before November 2nd, I believe, then it will be on the agenda for the December 21st meeting of the LLRC. So when I started to look at this and started to take a look at the hearing officer's report, I got through the first 10 pages, and for the most part, I was reading through and I saw basically comments like revisions have not been made in response to these comments and so forth. Then I got to page 11, and I think that's the big news, and that's what Chuck was referring to earlier, which is that with respect to what's reportable, the department made a change and added PFAS and PFAS substances to a list of reportable materials to be reported upon the release of any quantity. And that in the hearing officer's report, which I included the link, it's included on page 11, and it's 22A 450-2B1K. And if you go a little bit further into the document, there is a description, a rationale of what the department has done on page 25 of the document, the reason for change. And in part, it says that it's necessary for the proposed regulations to specifically address releases of PFAS, an emerging contaminant with serious adverse impact on human health, even at low concentration in the parts per trillion range. Requiring reports of PFAS releases will enable the department to tailor its response to these releases as the science concerning health risk and mitigation of PFAS releases evolve. That's the big takeaway, that PFAS has been incorporated into the spill regulations. I am sure we will be talking about this some more, and certainly happy to get reaction when I finish my report and before I turn it over to Mark. So that's what I have with respect to the spill reporting or the release reporting regulations. And for next month, do a summary as part of the waste task force summary. Turning to page 4, with respect to the remediation roundtable that was held on October 5th, included a couple links for you all with respect to a presentation with more detail on the Wave 2 RSRs and the EUR regulations, and also a link. Deep has posted a Q&A on its website with respect to the RSRs and the EUR regulations. So I point you to those. And then with respect to the underground storage tank regulations, which we've been following, they were up for review by the Legislation Regulation Review Committee on September 28th. They were sent back to Deep for revisions, both technical and some substantive related to a definition of field constructed tanks and the requirement that UST systems be compatible with regulated substances that are stored in the system. And that went back to Deep. Deep has turned that around, turned that around. It's back before the LLRC on the agenda for October 26th, and we'll be following that as well. So before I turn things over to Mark, just pause and get some reaction on the PFAS addition to the spill regs, and then turn it over to Mark if anybody has any comments.
So, excuse me, this is Chuck, just on the spill regulations. I mean, I've looked through it once. So in general, I think they made some tweaks, corrected some little inconsistencies within the regulations. They confirmed that unless you have secondary containment within a building, any building releases are reportable. They rejected all of Eversource's suggestions and comments, as well as many others. You know, there it is. We've been waiting 35 years for this, or maybe even longer, but we got something, and we'll see what happens. So I guess it's Mark's turn. Is he on?
I believe Mark's on.
Can you hear me? Hello?
We can, Mark.
Okay. So I'm on the phone, and I just had a couple things to add. One is reference to consolidations within the waste industry, which are picking up at a rapid clip throughout New England and also the rest of the country. I'll be doing a presentation on this topic for the Environmental Business Council next week, and there's some information in the handout on some of the recent activity, notably the acquisition of Covanta by a Swedish private equity firm, EQT Infrastructure. The effect of that is at this point unknown. I do expect that the private owners will evaluate the portfolio and make some decisions about which assets are worthwhile maintaining and which facilities they may choose to divest. Similarly, other acquisitions in Connecticut involved City Carding, We Liberator, Willimantic Waste, and then in Massachusetts, E.L. Harvey, which is an old-time waste handler that serviced central Massachusetts, I believe third generation. And so these consolidations occur similar to what's happening throughout the country with tech companies and other large businesses. So this is really a national and international trend. The other thing I wanted to mention is International E-Waste Day. This topic, the topic regarding electronic waste, has been somewhat dormant for a number of years since computer recycling was established as a relatively free service for residents, but due to the prevalence of obsolete electronic devices, the problem is mushrooming at a rapid clip. And in the EU, there is an effort to try to stem the tide of discarded electronic devices or properly manage them for end of life. So with that, I'll end my comments and take any questions if there are any.
Chuck, I think we're on to the next one.
Okay, so it sounds like we're done. Our next committee is the Water Committee. I don't think Debbie is here, but Wojtek is. So I'll turn it over to Wojtek.
Well, good morning, everyone. We don't really have much to report. Our, update was concerning the presentation that DEP already provided. So we're looking forward to the second session next month. And for those of you who don't know, Michelle Gore has departed from DEP. And that's kind of all we had.
Okay. Next up is Lee and energy, and I'm sure he'll have something to say.
Good guess, Chuck. Good guess. So I don't know if anybody's been reading about it, but on the next slide, we have something that ought to concern everybody, which is the daily spot price of natural gas at the Algonquin City Gate. I imagine those of you who are on this call now, there's nothing more that you talk about during breakfast than what the spot price of natural gas is at the City Gate. But the chart shows what you need to know, which is if you take a look at that, we've more than tripled our natural gas prices year over year. So the bottom line is 2020 and the top line is 2021 for the prices in the middle of October. And you may remember that back in 2012, the Malloy administration pushed for an increase in natural gas in homes, saying that he would get the utilities to build out natural gas lines and that we would convert 300,000 homes by 2020, switching over to natural gas. The last time the state really took a long, hard look at this, we had 39,000 homes that had converted by the end of 2018, along with another 12,000 commercial customers. So you have a slight increase in gas users, but not the big hit and the build out and the economies of scale that the Malloy administration wanted, coupled with prices for October that are the highest that they've been since 2014. And Chris Herb, for those of you who know him, is the president of the Connecticut Energy Marketers Association, which is the trade industry group for oil heat dealers, was quoted in the papers as saying, quote, "This is definitely an I told you so moment. All this government picking winners and losers played out really poorly for consumers," end quote. And short term, it looks like he's right. And if you skip to the next slide, it looks like it's a bad situation. Next slide. That's only going to get worse because as you can see where we are, the prices are going to spike and they're going to stay up for a while longer. According to the U.S. Energy Information Administration, they're projecting that the prices for gas from October of 2021 through March of 2022 will be the highest winter prices we've seen since the winter of 07 and 08. There's a couple reasons for that. One is that we have low reserves of natural gas sitting in storage right now. We also have a significant amount of liquefied natural gas being exported. That is, the natural gas comes out of the shale fields and the gas fields and gets converted to liquefied natural gas, gets put on a tanker, and then gets sent to Europe or wherever else, because as expensive as our natural gas prices are, Europe's are even worse. And we couple that with the fact that we've only had a modest amount of growth in domestic gas production. Those in the gas industry saw this coming, but with the pandemic and everything else, they weren't able to ramp up production as quickly as they wanted to. And they anticipate that we're going to have the growth in production that we need by the second quarter of 2022. But until then, we're kind of stuck with the law of supply and demand being inexorable, and so therefore the prices are going to go up. And what the Energy Information Administration wrote, and I'm quoting again, "The price outlook for this winter is very uncertain," close quote. And they cite all the lower inventories. And then they point out that it could even get worse, quote, "if any area in the United States experiences a severe cold snap." And that's what everybody, close quote, and that's what everybody's fearing right now is if we have another polar vortex, if we have another cold snap, that line doesn't just peak out at $6, it'll go up even higher. And you've got folks that have hedge contracts that are looking at that very, very nervously, and they're wondering how buildings are going to get heated and the like. And there's an even bigger problem that not everybody realizes if you go to the next slide. If you take a look in New England, the price of, and this is taken from ISO New England back in April, but which was the last snapshot I could find. But if you take a monthly snapshot in any month in New England, what you're going to see is the yellow line is the wholesale electricity price, and the darker line is the natural gas price, and the axes are electricity is on the left, and natural gas prices are on the right. The fact is that the way that our market is structured in New England, the electricity prices right now are going to always track almost identically, as you can see on the graph, are going to track what the natural gas prices are. When gas prices go up, in addition to increased cost of heating for those who heat with natural gas, you're also going to increase your electric rates. And if you take a look, the gas prices were lower in April than they are now in October, and they're only going to get worse. So the wholesale electric prices are also going to go up. And we may not feel that right away, but it is certainly coming down the pike soon, and it's going to be pretty significant, and that will only get worse if we have another polar vortex or even just a significant period of cold here in New England, because we'll deplete our reserves that we have for natural gas, and we only have a few facilities that can switch off and heat with fuel oil. So on the next slide, we have the Biden administration's answer to all of our problems, which is more wind power. So you may recall that the Trump administration claimed that wind turbines cause cancer, and it very much held up the approval of wind leases in federal waters for offshore wind. Biden has broken through that logjam. And you may also recall in the spring that the Biden administration announced that it wanted to have 30 gigawatts, which is 30,000 megawatts, or for those of you who still don't have a handy frame of reference, it's about 35 to 40 huge baseload electric generation facilities on the line somewhere between Millstone and Tewantic, or enough power for 10 million homes. So that's a significant amount of power that the Biden administration wants to secure from offshore wind, and he wants to get it done by 2030, which is also a pretty significant goal. So on the next slide, you can see a little bit of how they're going to get there. So as I mentioned, Trump had been slow to approve wind leases in federal waters. And what you can see is if you look very closely at the map, you'll see the line, the top line in the key that says federal state boundary. All of the proposed wind farms are in water that's shallower for the most part than 30 feet, but certainly shallow, but located beyond the state water borders. And the reason for that is it's a lot easier to permit something federally than it is to do the individual states. Think about, the permit process in Connecticut and realize that other states have similar procedures and whatnot. I'm sorry, meters, not feet. You're right. Thanks, Todd. At any rate, if you take a look at where the leases are right now, you'll see that there's a huge set of leases off the coast of Rhode Island and Massachusetts, some off of Long Island, and then some more off of New Jersey, and then further down south. Right now, the administration just finished its review of the Vineyard Wind project off of Massachusetts. Congratulations, Todd, for your group getting that done. And now they're going to move to New York and New Jersey, Ocean Wind in New Jersey, and the South Fork thing in New York. And there's 13 more projects that are currently under federal review, which the Biden administration has said it will get done by 2025. In addition to which, they're going to auction off more of these leasehold areas in similarly situated places. They're going to start looking, the next four, will be off of the coast of Maine, California, Oregon, and also in the Gulf of Mexico. And shifting off of wind, Connecticut has its own idea, and that is on the next slide. we have a picture of our favorite power plant in Connecticut, Millstone. Last week, the state released the annual Integrated Resources Plan, which is 207 riveting pages, gripping novel, will keep you up at the edge of your seat every single day. Unfortunately, I've had other things to do, and so I haven't quite gotten through the entirety of the 207 pages. But there are some big themes that emerge. The biggest one being is given away by the title of the thing, which is Integrated Resource Plan, a pathway to achieve 100% zero carbon electric sector by 2040. So it's no longer truly integrated. It's really an integrated renewable resource plan, or at least a zero carbon plan. And the goal of hitting 100% decarbonization by 2040, according to the plan, they claim it's doable. And when you think about it, it's kind of interesting. The numbers bear this out depending on how hard you squint. Right now, if you look at it on a megawatt hours per year basis, 65% of our generation is zero carbon. And that's 600,000 megawatts per year that's generated by class 1 renewable resources, and 9 million megawatt hours per year, so a full order of magnitude greater, that's generated by Millstone, hence the picture. So as they want to get to 100%, they're congratulating themselves and they're saying, well, we're already at 65% and we've got 19 years to get there. This is doable. If we continue on our current trajectory and do nothing, we think that we get to 92% by 2040. And then they suggest that they want to start overhauling ISO New England, because ISO New England fears for reliability, doesn't like intermittent resources, and therefore downplays the value of renewable energy, favoring instead natural gas. And then they also want to optimize the siting of generation resources. But the biggest thing that they want to do is, and I'm quoting from the report, the retention of Millstone beyond 2029 is a critical factor in how much more and how quickly Connecticut needs to procure new clean energy additions. And Dominion heard that and issued a statement in response saying that Millstone is, quote, vital for the state and region achieving their environmental reliability and clean energy goals, close quote. And then the company went on to say that it looks forward to working with Connecticut, quote, to ensure Millstone continues operating beyond its current contract and helping the state achieve its decarbonizing goals. And so the problem with achieving zero carbon by 2040 is that 90% of the zero carbon energy that is generating is coming out of Millstone, because nuclear does not generate carbon, and the current contracts that the state entered into with Millstone to allow Millstone to continue to operate all expire in 2029. So there would be a pretty steep cliff come 2030 if Millstone ceased operating and we didn't have 9 million megawatt hours per year of generation to replace that and have that generation be zero carbon. So it's an awful lot like saying, we can get there as long as, but we can't get there without, doing what we're already doing, and we have no plan in place. So it'll be very interesting to see, now that the state has laid its cards out on the table, it'll be very interesting to see what happens to Millstone going forward. And then, because I'm about to turn the mic back over to Chuck, it wouldn't be complete unless I went to the next slide and just mentioned what's going on with Eversource. So you may have read in the papers that Lamont and Governor Lamont and Attorney General Tong reached an agreement with Eversource. Eversource had been subject to some penalties by PURA related to its response to the storm last year. the penalty included a fairly significant, almost but not quite, $30 million penalty on return on equity, as well as some other penalties. The whole thing totaled out to about 30 million, which Eversource had appealed in the courts and said that Pura exceeded its authority when it issued that penalty. Now the governor's office and the attorney general, with the help of Deep, hammered out a settlement which totals out to 103 million all in, but the bulk of which are payments to customers. So of that 103 million, 65 million of it is going to go directly into customer pockets. 10 million is going to go to customer assistance for those customers who are indigent and are having problems with paying their bills. And then the other thing is that Eversource has agreed to a rate freeze until 2024. Now, what's interesting about the way rates work is Eversource will go to Pura in probably January of 2023 and ask for the rate increase and ask that that rate increase be effective January 1 of 2024. So the reality is Eversource extended a rate freeze for about a year because Eversource could have theoretically gone in a couple of months and asked for a rate increase for 2023, and now they won't. The governor and the attorney general issued a huge press release when this came out, made the front page of the Current, and they're obviously thrilled with their hard work. Eversource released a statement that said the agreement to refund the money to the ratepayers is a start to win back, quote, the hearts and minds, close quote, of Eversource's ratepayers. And they're probably not wrong about that. But what I think is really interesting is the truly salient analysis of the issue that was done by David Arconti, who is the House Chair of the Energy and Technology Committee of the General Assembly, who was quoted as saying, and I am quoting here, that's kind of my impression. It perpetuates a lot of the status quo with the company, end quote. So there you have that insightful analysis from one of the heads of legislative energy policy about $103 million settlement. And the first word out of his mouth was, And so with that, happy Friday to y'all, and I'm happy to take questions.
Well, thank you, Lee. Always entertaining. And I'm glad you end with something what we can help at Eversource.
Yes, and
Although
thank
I
you.
have nothing to do with it. Absolutely less than 0% of my time is spent on that. But I do feel for the team that's been working on these issues since Isaias. So
yeah, agreed. I mean, it does boil down to it's very interesting because both Eversource and United Illuminating, both with the way that the penalties shook out and also with the regulations and performance standards that are both have been developed and are going to be developed by Pura, you're now responsible for correctly predicting the weather. And I have a bad feeling that if the utilities didn't perfectly hedge their natural gas and electricity buys, that when the rates go up due to market forces beyond the utilities' control, the utilities are again going to get socked by the regulators for failing to correctly predict futures markets on commodities over which they had no control. But I guess we'll find that out this time next year.
well, thank you, Lee. We don't have any of our co-chairs for the air team today. I'm not sure if I should be announcing this, but Dave Krotchko is moving to a different job starting next week, and but he's hopeful to be back on the E2 team soon. So, and that leaves us with government affairs. So John and Ashley.
Good morning, everybody. Ashley, why don't you go?
Okay, so we have here some of the bills that are effective October 1. So if you have any questions on any of those, feel free to give me a call or shoot me an email. Harold already mentioned the release reporting regs being up, and just as an update on the release-based working group, we're in that phase 2, so there are a whole bunch of ad hoc committees that are working, and the drafting committee is working to put together the regulations. Hopefully we'll have that soon. And there is going to be a special meeting on October 26th from 1 to 2 for the review of the drafting team's results. So if you have any questions on that, please let me know. Also, we are, at CBIA are putting together our 2022 session priorities. So if you have any other input, let John or I know so we can try to work things in, and start bugging the legislators for all of the things that we need to make the state a lot better.
Thank you, Ashley. And then quickly on the energy side, we're basically in the in-between sessions, as you know. We're kind of doing our pre-session activities, which include, we had a meeting with DEEP legislative liaison and the Pure legislative liaison, just to create a couple of synergies there as we head into the next session. The other things we're paying attention to at both Pure and DEEP is Pure's framework for an equitable modern electric grid in Connecticut. They've had ongoing meetings, as you know, and hearings and discussions. We continue to track and participate in those activities. And as far as DEEP goes, many of you know the Integrated Resource Plan has been being worked on, was finalized October 7th. And I'm in the process of reviewing that, going over that. Ashley mentioned that we are, as part of our pre-session planning, we are putting together our legislative priorities. So I would reiterate that if there's anything that you think we should be paying attention to, or you are able to predict what they're going to do over there, that would be great if you could pass that along. Otherwise, we will keep an eye out for that. And we are going to be meeting with legislative chairs and key staff. We've already begun to do that at the legislature to get a sense as to what they may be putting out. And this year, we're going to look to draw attention to things that create costs for our businesses, such as project labor agreements that got attached to some renewable statutory language last year. We're going to keep a keen eye out for project labor agreements in energy and at large, because we do see it in other emerging markets. They seem to be wanting to attach project labor agreements, which obviously increase costs for all, and are a barrier, I believe, to folks coming to Connecticut at times. So we will focus on those. I'd be happy to answer any questions. If you have any input, again, please let us know. And I wish you a good Friday. I think that's it.
One last thing is the agency should be putting out their proposals for what they would like introduced within the next, I would say, 2 weeks, give or take. DEEP got an extension for their due date, which I think had already passed, but they were still working and finalizing a few things. So we'll keep you guys up to date and send out the agency proposals when we get them.
Thank you. Marcy, anything from you?
I don't have anything.
Anything from anybody else for the good of the order on this call? Well, with that, have a good weekend. For all those Red Sox fans out there, it's now time to stay up late for the next week or so. Hopefully it'll be longer. If anybody's an Astros fan, go home.